the first employment committee meeting of the administration. We're all here, I think. Do you want to offer the apologies?
Thank you, Chair. I've received apologies from Councillor Alan Ashbury, Councillor Mark Vagenham and Councillor Leanne McIntyre. Councillor Wilson is subbing for Councillor McIntyre.
Okay, welcome. And we have Councillor White remotely, is that correct?
And Councillor Ted is just coming in now.
Councillor Tedder as well. Okay,
Yep.
good. Welcome. Fine. So the first item of business is the election of a vice chair. Do we have any nominations for that, please?
Yes, please, Chair. Could I propose Councillor Sean MacDonald?
Thank you. And do we have a seconder for that?
Seconded.
Thank you, Councillor Gordon. So welcome to the onerous task, leader of vice chairman of the employment committee. I shall share all the problems with you, you may be sure. Right. Okay. Does anybody have any declarations of interest that they want to make at this point, please? I'll take that as a no. Okay. So we'll move straight on then to item 5, which is the menopause policy, which Mrs. Kipper is going to introduce for us, I believe. Oh, the minutes. I always forget the minutes. Sorry. Are we happy to sign off the minutes? Only one person, I think, was here. Councillor Wheeler, are they all right as far as you're concerned?
I think Councillor Gordon was here as well. I think what
sorry.
we've done this time round with all minutes is just to sign them and take them as an accurate
Fine.
record, given the change in personnel.
Okay. Pink.
Yeah.
Right. That makes a change. Right, apologies for that. As I was saying, we're now going to move on to item 5, which is a menopause policy. Mrs. Kipping, thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good evening, councillors, and welcome to the Employment Committee. I am your lead officer for this committee, and I am nobly assisted by my colleague, Mrs. Simmons here. I just wanted to very briefly, before we launch into the policy, I just wanted to mention the governance pathway that each policy goes through before it gets to this committee, just so that you were aware of it. It initially goes to senior officers for feedback. It then goes through the Joint Staff Consultative Group, which is a group made up of councillors and staff representatives, and then this is its final sign-off point, if you like, before it becomes a live policy for the council. This menopause policy is a brand new policy for the council. We haven't had a menopause policy before. We have tried to make it as inclusive as possible, and it's a really important part of our equalities offering that we deliver policies such as this. The tracked changes within the policy that you will see, green and blue tracked changes, they are changes that the Joint Staff Consultative Committee made, so you can see the comments that they made. It's particularly important for Surrey Heath because our workforce is 64% female and predominantly aged between 45 and 65. So this is a particularly important policy for us. I would very much welcome your views, thoughts and questions on it. Thank you very much, committee.
Thank you, Mrs. Kipping. Right, anybody have any comments? Councillor Wheeler, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points. In the introduction, the statement is made that employees, blah, blah, whether moderate or severe, are required to talk to their line managers or HR. I would suggest that that is changed to be in line with point 3, are encouraged to, rather than required to. There are further down, there's a variance just in layout, which is, I just got a tidy up formatting, which is under point 4, the second bank of points there have got a variance. And I think, oh, I said 3, there must be another one somewhere. Hang on, have I missed one? Those are the only 2. If I can find the third one, I'm pretty sure it was 3 that I'd highlighted. If I can find the third one, I'll come in again if that's okay. But that was it. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I don't think any of those present any problem. We're quite happy to incorporate those comments within the within the final draft. Does anybody else have any other comments, questions that they wish to make? Leader.
Thank you, Chair. Just really a question. I know that many organisations provide additional support over and above directing people to websites and various other things. One I happen to have come across, I think it's a Peppy app, which gives access to various talks and various other things that are supportive for people. Was consideration given to that in terms of the policy, or was it ruled out in terms of cost?
Mrs. Kipping.
So we didn't actually look at an app. I'd be really interested in seeing that. If the leader wouldn't mind sending me some details, I'd definitely look into that. That would be really interesting thing. We're always looking for ways to develop and improve, so that would be great.
Could I come back briefly, Chair?
Certainly.
Thank you. Just to say, very, very supportive from my side. Clearly, we are all related to women that have gone through these experiences. So I think extremely positive policy to see come forward. Thank you.
Good. I'm looking at the screen. Does no, right? Councillor White is happy. Did we have anybody else in attendance?
Councillor Taylor, but I presume she hasn't got her hand up and she hasn't got her camera on.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
Sorry, I have found the other one, Chair. It's just the page numbering at the bottom, which is obliterated on some of the pages by the Surrey Heath logo. So that just needs to be sorted out as well.
At least it's obliterated with something good. Fine. Good. That being the case, we unless anybody has any other observations, we are asked to resolve that the menopause policy be adapted and adopted. Shall it be so?
Can I just confirm for Chair that that is as amended?
As amended.
Thank you.
Thank you. Since nobody's shouting against, I'm going to assume that everybody's in favour. Good. Thank you. Right, we'll move on. Item 6, which is the job evaluation policy and procedure. Once again, I'm going to ask Mrs. Kipping to introduce that item. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. This evaluation policy and procedure was in existence. This isn't a new policy. We have feedback, a substantial feedback from the staff, actually echoed in the peer challenge just recently, that it was perceived that the job evaluation process lacked transparency and openness. We didn't receive the feedback that the actual marking system, if that makes sense, was unfair, but it was the process itself that was seen as lacking transparency. So what we've done with the policy and procedure, we've worked quite closely with staff reps and the Joint Staff Consultative Committee on this one, and just expanded the procedure to make it much clearer, which is, so the main changes relate to section 5, where we've laid out in much greater clarity what we actually do. We've also added quite a lot of information in section 6 about appeals to make it clear on what basis appeals may be made. And one of the other major changes for this policy was that we have now included line managers in presenting to the job evaluation panel, so that line managers feel much more involved in the process, and we can ask as a panel then questions about the job, really get under the job's purpose. The other big change on this policy that staff reps were very keen on was to add the frequently asked questions section, so that staff really could have very common questions that they frequently asked answered within the process. So those were the key changes to this one. And as I say, an important part of our fairness and transparency offering. Thank you, committee, and I'd welcome your comments.
Thank you, Mrs. Kipping. And it has to be said that at the joint staff meeting, the staff were very appreciative of the changes which Mrs. Kipping has just outlined. And I think it's particularly important that the line managers are now involved to a much greater degree than they were hitherto. Does anybody have any questions or comments, please? Councillor White. Wheeler, sorry.
That's all right. We're almost interchangeable, I suppose. Valerie, what do you reckon? Can't really tell us apart. It's just the formatting again at the bottom, and I think it's where we're flipping the tree. So it's when we flip the tree, it obliterates the numbering. That's literally it.
Thank you. We've noted the problem with the tree. Good. Leader, please.
It's more a question. Unfortunately, I can't click through into the various forms and whatnot, but it just felt a little bureaucratic to me. I think I counted about 4 forms. Did you reflect on whether it was slick and lean?
We are actually going to do a new JOT form, aren't we, Julie? We're sorry, Mrs. Simmons. And yes, we are aware of the sort of form issues, and we are trying to streamline that through the JOT form thing, so which will make it much more easier to self-serve, fill in and complete, and then have workflows attached to it. So you're doing that at the moment, I believe. We are indeed. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Just as a general observation, I think job evaluation, almost by definition, is it's a pretty administrative heavy process, and does rely heavily on the printed material, as it were. Right. Anything else? No. Good. Okay. So we are asked to resolve that the job evaluation policy and procedure be resolved as adopted, and I agree. That's unanimous. Thank you very much. So we'll move on to item 7, which is managing demands, which sounds a bit scary to me. But anyway, once again, it falls to Mrs. Kipping to introduce this item for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. And hopefully I can give you a bit of context around the change of name. So this again was an existing policy. It was originally just called the Exceptional Payments Policy. And managers were really unclear about how and when to use it. Again, it was seen as quite unfair, this policy. And when I started at Surrey Heath, I got quite a lot of feedback that it was causing problems because staff didn't really understand when they could expect payments under this policy and when they couldn't expect payments under the policy. It was very clear it was being inconsistently applied. So what we've tried to introduce is that the names of policies reflect the actual issue they're trying to address. In this case, what we were trying to address is peaks and troughs of workflow demands where you couldn't manage it through the flexi-time policy, where the peak of demand was too much to do that. So we did change the name to managing demand. There has been a rather lively debate whether it should be managing workflow, and I'd very much welcome the committee's views on that. Have no particular qualms with either one. Again, as I say, part of our fairness and transparency agenda, we always prefer to use flexi-time, but there are some times where that just isn't applicable. We didn't have a payment of overtime policy. We did have some guidance, but not a policy. So we wanted to put that in. The other things that we wanted to add in to this particular policy was a bit about working patterns and hours, and in particular, the right to rest. And that's due to the whole change in flexible working. We tend to all be on WhatsApp now. And so what we wanted to make managers and staff aware of is that it was inappropriate to WhatsApp staff outside working hours, that they were entitled to this right to rest. Again, there's track changes following joint staff. There's one big change that you won't see in this policy because it's a removal, and that is the original policy allowed for the payment of honoraria payments. In other words, effectively payments without payments just because you've done a bit of extra work. We struggled to identify how that could be fairly and consistently applied, because some managers were wanting to do it all the time and other managers weren't applying it in the same set of circumstances. We really looked quite hard at that, and in the end we felt that it was setting an expectation that was unfair and inconsistent, and therefore we removed it in its entirety. So a big change for this is the removal of the ability to give honoraria. We just felt it wasn't appropriate in this particular council. So that's the changes that this policy has primarily made. And again, I'd welcome thoughts and questions.
Thank you for that. On the subject of the honoraria, when I first looked at this before joint staff, I thought this might be an issue with the staff. In actual fact, exactly the opposite proved to be the case. There was a very strong feeling that the honoraria system had been misapplied and was therefore unfair on the vast majority of staff who didn't receive the honoraria. And a bit to my surprise, in fact, they welcomed the fact that the whole system was removed. So that turned out to be a real step forward, I think. Right, comments, questions, please. Councillor Wheeler this time. You actually got it right. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a couple of points. I'm absolutely horrified that we use WhatsApp as a method of communication with our staff. My understanding is that all staff members have access to Teams. The beauty of Teams is that you can mute any transaction. I think it's a very difficult expectation to expect managers not to use WhatsApp or Teams out of hours. It's down to the individual staff member as to whether or not they react to it. So I have to say I have some issues with the wording around that and the expectation around that. And I would certainly encourage Surrey Heath as an organisation to move away from WhatsApp without delay. You don't own the data. It's not secure. People could do what they like with it, irrespective of any internal agreements. And those agreements are overwritten by WhatsApp's policies. So that, I feel, is something that needs to be addressed fairly rapidly. The other thing is a very minor point, and that is that we are using agencies with a finder's fee attached if their contract is transferred into a permanent position. It's a very old-fashioned way of working. And certainly if we used any of the CCS agreed agencies, there is a clause in there that says after 3 months, those people have to transfer without penalty, so without fee. So maybe, again, that's just something we should look at on a slightly broader basis.
Do you care to comment on that?
Firstly, thank you for your comments, Councillor Wheeler. They're very useful. I'll certainly have a look at the social media policy about the sort of points around WhatsApp. I think they're very valid. You know, it's definitely, there's a hangover from COVID days, I think, where we felt we had to be able to contact each other very, very quickly. And you're absolutely right that it isn't a great method of communication. So we'll certainly have a look at that. I think that's a really valid point. In relation to your second point, you know, again, very valid. We'll certainly have a look at that in our agency appointments.
Can I just check, do all staff have access to Teams? Because Teams is fabulous. You can have it on your phone if you want to be contacted, and you can mute it if you don't. It's...
Yes, all staff have access to Teams.
Sorry, anybody else? Please.
Thank you. Just wondering if you could just give a brief explanation about the flexi time system, it says there's a link in the document, but it's not actually there, the link. How much flexi time can employees build up? Is there a maximum?
Thank you. So staff can, they can accrue flexi between the working hours of 8 o'clock in the morning through to 6 o'clock at night. So they can't do it outside of those hours. And they can accrue up to 10 days or 2 weeks, you know, depending on their working patterns. But they have to take it within 2 months. So yes, so that's in a nutshell what it is. And it's as Mrs. Kipping was saying, it's very much to cover peaks and troughs within workflows.
Right.
All right.
Thank you.
You're more than welcome.
You're happy with that, Councillor Wilson? Councillor Fine and Cook. Hopefully I got that right.
Thank you, Chair. It was just a very minor point. I very much like the alternative title to the policy. And I think it's much more reflective of the spirit of working here. And so I would definitely advocate for a change to workflow rather than demands.
Leader, perhaps you might comment on your thoughts on the title as well, if you weren't already going to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't going to comment on the title. I'll be happy to go with others' opinion on that. My question, I think, is around extraordinary situations. So we know, you know, COVID's a great example, but there are other kind of weather events, other crises that may happen. There's quite strong statements in there about things we can't do with respect to things like 48 hours, going over 48 hours, which I understand the context of those. Are you confident that the policy allows enough flexibility for those very unusual situations where something might be required of an extraordinary nature from people, should they be willing to do it over a short period of time, and that they would get appropriately recompensed for it?
Please.
Thank you so much, Leader. That's an excellent question. And in fact, one of the specific changes that joint staff wanted to make was the need to agree overtime in advance. One of the changes they made for that very reason was that there might be an exceptional need for overtime, and therefore it might not be able to be agreed in advance. With the working patterns and hours, our default position is to obviously adhere to the working time directive, but that does allow that in an emergency situation you can work more hours than that. One adaptation that you may want to add into this is a note saying unless there are exceptional or emergency circumstances, and I'd be very happy to insert that into the policy if that would be helpful and clarify.
Does that meet your point, Leader?
Yes, it does. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, and obviously escalate the approval for that, which I guess must probably a level above the norm. Yep.
Thank you for that. Anybody else? I'm looking at the screen. No, right. Okay. So the question now arises about the name. I have to say that from a personal point of view, I find the current name doesn't actually mean very much in it as it stands. Managing demand is a very vague sort of expression. So I think the managing workflow would be a better title, with the brackets about exceptional payments policies to follow. Would anybody have any objection to making that change? And how would the officers feel about that, Mrs. Kipping?
I'm happy just to take that back to staff reps and make sure that they're okay with it. I'm sure they would be, because we did have that discussion and that we were about evenly split at the time. So I'm sure they would be, but I will just go back to staff reps and check they're okay. And we can also, leader, check that point about the exceptional circumstances. And actually, having known staff reps and the fact that they wanted to put the comment about the overtime, I'm sure they will be satisfied with both those points.
Okay, so with the changes which were made and Councillor Wheeler's comments about WhatsApp and finders fees, you'll go back to the staff reps and just run that by them, and if necessary, bring it to the next joint staff meeting if there's a problem.
Yes, exactly. So I'll take the points about the workflow and the exceptional circumstances. I think the social media will probably need to go on our work programme. Is it already in there? It's already in there. So there you go. So that will take that note for the social media point, and the agency point isn't a policy point, it's a procedural point. So we can just look into that. It doesn't need to be on the work programme.
Fine. So are we Councillor Wheeler?
Sorry, thank you, Chair. Can I just come back on social media policy? I think ahead of that coming back and ahead of that going through, from a good management point of view, it can't help but be prudent to encourage our staff to communicate via Teams, which is a work-based communication tool, rather than WhatsApp. So if we have to wait for it to go into policy that WhatsApp should not be used as a communication tool, we're quite a way off. I think it would be nice to have some assurance that we are encouraging our staff to have our Teams groups set up with Teams, our chat set up with Teams, and maybe our documentation arranged accordingly as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to comment on that?
Yes, I'm quite happy to put out some communications to that effect. I think that's absolutely right and proper. I don't think it affects the actual wording of the policy, but I'm quite happy to do some comms to that effect.
You content with that, Councillor Wheeler? Thank you. Good. Okay. So subject to the changes which were just outlined by Mrs. Kipping, are we happy to resolve that the policy be adopted? Yeah. Good. Okay. Thank you. We then move on to item 8, which is the work programme, which I think is on page 46. Would you just care to go through that, Mrs. Kipping, please?
Yes, of course, Chair. So for the next meeting in October, there are 4 items. Probably the most substantial item is a new item for Surrey Heath, which is the people strategy. We're working on that at the moment. So what that will do is pull all the data that we've had from the staff survey, the peer review, and previous data collected in one place to have effectively a recruitment and retention strategy. I'm writing that at the moment, and that will come in October to here. And then there are 3 policies. They're all in existence at the moment, and you can see they say review by them, and Julie's team will be looking at each of those policies, and in a similar way to the policies we've brought today, bringing them for your comment and consideration. Then in February you can see that we are beginning to look at the pay settlement formally. Those negotiations are actually going to be starting in the summer. So that is the formal sign off of the pay settlement, which will take effect from the 1st of April 2024. We have a Speak Up policy annual report and review. So that is commenting on the number of Speak Up issues that we have had reported to us. We've also got agile working, carers policy, which is new. So this is following on from feedback from staff. We introduced updated family-friendly policies in the last employment committee, and the feedback we got was that yes, that was fine for families, but what about people who had caring responsibilities for adults? So that is why that is on the work programme. And then we have the pensions discretion policy, which is an annual thing for review and recruitment. And then you can see in the March meeting, again, we've got the pay settlement. That assumes that there is protracted negotiations. We may, of course, not need that if it's all been agreed at an earlier point. And then there are some fairly straightforward reviews of the grievance policy and disciplinary policy, specifically for statutory and non-statutory senior officers. So you can see there that potentially the March programme has some capacity in it to look at different things if you wanted us to. Oh, and we've also got, sorry, Mrs. Simmons has just reminded me, got 2 new things to put on, which is mental health provision and flexible working. I would imagine that flexible working would sit nicely with agile working in February, and mental health will probably come to March.
Okay. So you're not going to be very busy then, are you? Fine. I suggest that if anybody's got any burning issues they want to include in the programme, that you either mention them now or via email subsequent to the meeting. Does anybody have any issues that they want to raise now? Leader.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very quick one, if you allow me. I guess the phasing of these is to manage the workload within the team. Is that correct? Okay, so there's no opportunity to pull forward the carers policy and drop some of the other ones back?
Yes, Mrs. Simmons just reminded me that we're waiting for some legislation to come through from government, which is why we've got it pinned for that particular time.
Very good, thank you.
Okay, anybody want to raise anything now? I'll take that as a no. If you do have any thoughts about that, perhaps you could send them in sooner rather than later. Let's say within the next week. And then they can be incorporated as required. Okay, that being the case, I believe that brings the meeting to a close. And thank you for your attendance and your input. And thank you for the virtual attenders as well. Thank you. Good night. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.